Today we're going to be talking about the Holocaust, which is a very dark period in our world's history. In an effort to keep it developmentally appropriate, I've curated the images so that they should be appropriate to your age level for you to see. If you go to research this on your own, I will just caution you that you will probably come across images that you find to be disturbing. Okay, the Holocaust was the systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its allies and collaborators. Holocaust is a word of Greek origin meaning sacrifice by fire. The Nazis who came to power in Germany in January of 1933 believed that Germans were racially superior and that the Jews deemed inferior were an alien threat to the so-called German racial community. And that is the definition taken from the Holocaust Museum website. Now, the Holocaust, we know, was a very dark time in our history of the world, but it didn't just begin in 1933 with the rise of the Nazis in Germany. It has its roots in our world history. And here's how it started. It started with this idea of anti-Semitism and Aryan supremacy. And it turned into a systematic attempt to rid Europe of all Jews by the Nazis. Anti-Semitism is a word that simply means prejudice against or hatred of Jews. Anti-Semitism has its roots in the Christian faith. Jesus, who is the Messiah of the Christians, who was a Jew himself, was killed on a cross and crucified. And Christians blame his death on the Jews. As you can see in this illustration from the medieval times, you can see the Messiah Jesus in the middle with a halo on his head, surrounded by Jews who have this hooked nose, which will become important later. Martin Luther, who is the founder of the Protestant faith, had this to say about Jewish people. What then shall we Christians do with this rejected and condemned people, the Jews? Their synagogues should be set on fire, and what does not burn must be covered over with earth, so that no man will ever see stone or cinder of them again. Their houses also shall be razed and destroyed. All their prayer books should be taken from them. So this hatred of the Jews has a very long history. When we look at Christian nations, in European history, most of them are on this side of Europe, on the western side of Europe. England, Italy is where the Vatican is. The Roman Empire itself blamed Jews for the murder of Jesus. And so as Jews were experiencing persecution from Christian nations, they started to move east into Russia, where they also experienced persecution. Russians started to have what is called pogroms, which is a Russian word that means to wreak havoc or to demolish violently. And the Russian people would blame the Jewish people for problems that they had in their country, and they would commit acts of violence against them, as you can see illustrated in this drawing. They took it a step further by the Russian secret police curating and publishing this pamphlet called The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which essentially blamed the Jewish people for many of Russia's problems. They made it look like the Jewish people had written this pamphlet, but they in fact did not, and it is a forgery. But to this day, it is still published and translated across the world into multiple languages. And it just fueled this idea of anti-Semitism or hatred against Jews. At the time before World War II, science was advancing, and the hooked nose that was distinguishable of a Jew and made to show deceit, as opposed to an Aryan person or a white person who was sincere, was advanced into science. And as you can see, I know these are in different languages, but you can see the scientific chart where they are genetically showing how Jewish people carry their DNA through, and how somebody can be contaminated with their Jewish heritage. So you see all of this science that is trying to prove Aryan supremacy, that people with blonde hair and blue eyes and pale skin are the preferred race of the European nations. So this man, Adolf Hitler, comes to power. He writes this book called Mein Kampf, which in English means My Struggle, and he says two things. He says, after World War I, Germany has been squished into a very small area of land, and it's the Jews' fault. And so you can see this political cartoon from the time with a finger pointing at the Jews, saying it's their fault. Adolf Hitler rises to power among the German people, and he institutes his rule with his military, with the SS police, with the Nazi soldiers. So he is able to overthrow the German president and become a dictator in Germany. So he enforces these ideas, this discrimination against Jewish people. One of the first things he does is he has people boycott Jewish stores. He creates laws that discriminate against them, and he segregates the Jewish people from the rest of the German nation. So you can see that there is a store here that says Jude on it. You can see this yellow patch. This is the Star of David, which is a Jewish symbol with the word Jude. And Jewish people were made to wear this star. And they were given rules. They weren't allowed to go out at certain times of the day. They were not allowed to attend school with people who were Aryan. And there are all kinds of different discriminatory laws that were instituted against them. And you can see that violence erupted amongst the Jewish, against the Jewish people. And this is a picture of a very famous event called Kristallnacht, which means the night of broken glass. And that's a night where Jewish storefronts were broken, the glass was broken, their stores were looted, synagogues were set on fire, and many Jewish people were killed in acts of anger against them. And it heightened even more with later tactics. Jewish people are put into ghettos, and they are imprisoned and then later killed in concentration and death camps. Ghettos were parts of the city where Jewish people were taken, and walls and fences were erected to keep them inside. What started off as barbed wire fences in the Warsaw Ghetto became a 10-foot-high wall with barbed wire on top. So you were no longer able to see inside the ghetto. And once that was constructed, conditions were made even worse inside the ghetto. People were not given adequate food or medical attention. They were policed without any real laws, just with the intent to terrorize. And you can see from these children up here in this photograph how dismal their circumstances became. It's clearly very cold, and these children don't have adequate clothing to keep them warm. Meanwhile, the German state was constructing concentration camps. One of the very famous ones is called Auschwitz, and as you enter Auschwitz, you see this sign that says, "Work makes you free." And they brought in political prisoners to come and construct the camps, where they would have barracks surrounded by barbed wire, and they would concentrate large numbers of people in these camps with the intent to exterminate them. So you can see in the very beginning that it was mostly men. And life in the concentration camps were very hard. People slept in barracks. As you can see, they're just bunk beds piled on top of each other without any So many people were crammed into very tight quarters. Often they would get typhoid and pass it between each other, or they would break out in lice or have fleas because of their cramped conditions. They were not given adequate bathrooms. And so many of them were sick because they didn't have soap to wash or proper bathrooms to use. They would get up at 4:30 in the morning and be made to stand in these lines for hours while their names were called out and roll call was taken. Then they were made to work. In the beginning, the men created different concentration camps, and then they were just worked to death. They were marched through the snow until they were so tired that some of them would just fall down and die. They were made to carry large stones from one place to another for no reason except that they would become fatigued to die. So this was when concentration camps first began. All of the people from the ghettos were soon emptied from the ghettos to concentration camps once they were constructed with the intent to kill them. And they were brought by train, and you can see how tightly packed they were. These trains would travel for days or weeks on end, and there were no bathrooms. There was just one small bucket in the corner for everyone to use. There was no place to lay down, and so as a result, many people died on the train ride to the concentration camps. When people from the ghetto arrived onto the train platform, they were greeted with SS soldiers and barking dogs. And many of the survivors remarked that they smelled chicken roasting in the air. But we'll learn soon that that was not chicken that they were smelling. They were divided into different groups. All of the women and the children, the disabled, the pregnant, the elderly were put into one line, and all of the young men were put into another line, and they were separated. The weak group, the women and the children and the elderly, were brought to this is an overview, a bird's eye view of the building that they were brought into. They were brought first into a room to undress and told that they would be having a shower. Their heads and bodies were shaved, and then they were brought into this room, and this is a gas chamber, but they were told it was a shower, and oftentimes there were shower heads actually constructed to make it look that way. They were all crammed into this room, and there was a door in the back, a big heavy metal door that the Nazi soldiers would close behind them. Then they would go up to the roof of the gas chamber, and they would put a chemical called Zyklon B through the vents, which would create a poisonous gas that would kill all of the people inside within a matter of minutes. They would then open the door once everyone had died, and they would bring stretchers in and carry their bodies out, and then they would put them in these crematoriums where they would burn them, their bodies. And that is, in fact, what the people were smelling when they got off of the trains, was the bodies of people who had been killed being burned. It's estimated that 1 million people were systematically killed in Auschwitz alone. Here are some of the remains that were taken from their body. This is a pile of eyeglasses. These are wedding rings, and this is hair. When the Allies liberated Auschwitz, they found 7 tons of hair. And I want you to think about that. A ton is very heavy, and hair is very light. So I want you to think about how much hair they found. And this hair was used all throughout Europe to make mattresses and pillows and even line submarines. So all of the good things that people had before they died were taken and reused for the Nazis' benefit. It's estimated that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, but as you can see from this chart, many other people died as well, including 3 million Soviet prisoners of war and hundreds of homosexuals who were grouped into the category of repeat criminal offenders. So if you were an enemy of the Nazi state, you were killed. The Allies did liberate the concentration camps, and all of the people who were still alive were very grateful. And they still lost people after they had liberated them. As you can see from the state many of them were in, hundreds of people still died after they were liberated. But they were eventually freed. All right, we'll talk more about this in class together.